My mother-in-law works part-time on her pension baking bread and cookies to order. One day, my wife asked me to go to her mom's house to pick up some baked goods. I agreed. "What's the occasion?" I asked my wife. "They invited our daughter for her birthday and brought her a present," she explained. I was embarrassed to walk in on them uninvited, but I had no choice. When I arrived, I heard my mother-in-law calling to me from the kitchen, "Come in, Alex. I'll buy you a pie." I took off my shoes and went into the kitchen. She was standing in the heat of the kitchen. The window was open to cool off. She was only wearing a loose t-shirt that dangled carelessly over her body. She smiled at me with a knowing look and held out the pie. I obediently took a bite, feeling a strange tension between us. She seemed to be reading my mind. "Isn't it sweet?" she asked, and I almost choked on the pie. The atmosphere was ambiguous, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My mother-in-law had never spoken to me like that. "Sit down," she said. "Have some tea. What's the hurry?" And really, what's the hurry? I sat down at the table, watching her move gracefully around the kitchen. For a woman of her age, she was surprisingly agile. She handed me a cup, and I couldn't help but notice her energy. She was far from a typical senior citizen. There was something almost magnetic about her presence, and I felt myself being drawn in despite my common sense. The way she moved, the way she smiled, it was all mesmerizing, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was all about. As I sipped my tea, she asked again, "So, are my cakes sweet?" I nodded, but her question seemed to have a double meaning, conjuring up different images. She looked at me, amused. "I see," she said, deliberately teasing. Her gaze lingered on me, and I felt my face redden. It was hard to tell if she was just joking or if there was something else lurking beneath her words. I tried to brush it off, but my heart was pounding in my chest. Then she suddenly said, "I have some wine. Do you want to freshen up?" I said yes. Who could turn down homemade wine? She poured it into a glass, and I drank it all at once. She kept moving as she passed me, and at one point playfully slapped my ass. I tried to keep my composure, but I was tense. Her touch sent a shiver through me, and before I knew it, we were in the bedroom. Honestly, I don't even remember how it happened. It was all a blur, her hands on me, her whispering in my ear. We left that room a little disheveled, my heart pounding and my head spinning with disbelief. When I got home, my wife asked, "Why were you gone so long?" I mumbled something inaudible, and she didn't ask any more questions. I brought baked goods to the party, but my mind was on something else. I replayed the events in my head, wondering how things had escalated so quickly. I went to bed earlier than usual. My head was buzzing, and I couldn't think about anything else. I tried to convince myself that it was an isolated incident, an error in judgment, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The next morning, my wife had already left for work, and my daughter was at school. I was home alone and still thinking about what had happened. I wanted to call my mother-in-law, but I hesitated. Would she even answer? What would I say? Just as I was thinking about it, the phone rang. Her cheerful voice said, "Come over, Alex. I've got the most delicious cake for you." How could I refuse? There was something in her tone that made it impossible to say no. As I put on my shoes and walked out the door, I felt fear and excitement. I hurried over there, and there she was again, wearing the same revealing t-shirt She handed me another pie, insisting that I eat it out of her hands. Then she poured us more compote. We were back in the bedroom. It was as if she was in complete control, and I couldn't resist. She knew exactly how to take matters into her own hands, and I found myself helpless under her influence. Each time stronger than the last, as if she was testing my boundaries, testing how far she could go. It was exhilarating and frightening at the same time. Afterward, we sat in the kitchen as if nothing had happened. She got me drunk on tea and juice, and we chatted casually. She talked about mundane things, her clients, her prescriptions, her pension, but every now and then she would glance at me and smile, a hint of mischief in her eyes. When I left, she hinted when I should come back. And I came 3 times a week, sneaking in for tea and cakes, but mostly just to see what else would happen. It was becoming a habit, an addiction I couldn't shake off. Every time I left, I promised myself it would be the last time, but invariably I would return. It became a routine. My wife rarely spoke to her mother, and that was to my advantage. The secrecy made it all the more exciting, as if we were sharing a dangerous secret. The only downside was that I started gaining weight. One day, my wife remarked, "You seem to be gaining weight," she remarked. I brushed her off, but I knew the reason. My mother-in-law was now sending me text messages consisting of one word, pie. It was our code, and I responded every time. The thrill, the danger of being caught it, was like a drug, and I couldn't get enough. Every time I got her message, I ran to her like a fool. If someone had told me a year ago that I would be in this situation, I wouldn't have believed it. I've never been a fan of baked goods, but now I couldn't get enough. It wasn't just the brownies, it was the thrill, the danger, the way it made me feel alive. Each visit was like a new adventure, and I was hooked on her. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't resist. The way she looked at me, the way she touched me, all of it made me feel like I was the only person in the world. One day, after one of our usual meetings, we were sitting in the kitchen again, drinking tea. She looked at me and said, "You know, Alex, it's good to have you around. It gets lonely around here sometimes." Her voice was softer and more vulnerable than usual. I didn't know how to respond. It struck me that, despite everything, she was just a woman looking for connection. For a moment, I felt a prick of guilt after all. This was my wife's mother. But the guilt quickly faded away when she reached out and touched my hand, and her eyes took in mine. There was something in her gaze that made me forget all the reasons why this was wrong. "Are you coming over tomorrow?" she asked, her tone becoming playful again. I nodded, knowing that I would come. I couldn't resist her, and she knew it. We were both playing this game, and neither of us wanted it to end. There was an unspoken understanding between us. It was our secret, and we both craved the thrill. The way she smiled at me, the way she made me feel it, was all addictive. Our secret meetings continued. Each time, I could feel the tension building as soon as I crossed the threshold of her house. There was something intoxicating about the way she owned the situation, the way she teased me and kept me in suspense. It wasn't just physical, but psychological arousal as well, a power dynamic that both alarmed and excited me at the same time. She had me wrapped around her finger, and I knew it. I was in her power, and she was enjoying every second of it. And, to be honest with myself, so did I. One afternoon, After finishing up, we sat on the couch instead of in the kitchen. She leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. It was a strangely intimate feeling, more so than anything we'd done before. "You make me feel young again," she whispered, and for the first time, I saw a vulnerable and sincere side of her. It wasn't just about the thrill now. It was about the connection we'd made, however wrong it was. There was a tenderness in this moment that took me by surprise. I realized that despite the nature of our relationship, there was a connection between us that went beyond the physical. As I left that day, I had mixed feelings: excitement, guilt, confusion. I realized that what we were doing was dangerous, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. The attraction of my mother-in-law, the way she made me feel, was too strong. And so I returned again and again, unable to free myself from the spell she cast over me. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized that it wasn't just the excitement, but the way she understood me, the way she seemed to know exactly what I needed. One day she surprised me with the question, "Have you ever thought about what might happen if we get caught?" Her tone was light, but there was some poignancy in the question. I hesitated, not knowing how to answer. The thought had crossed my mind more than once, but I always brushed it aside. "I try not to think about it," I admitted. She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "Me too," she said quietly. "But sometimes I wonder." We sat in silence, her words hanging between us. It was the first time either of us had acknowledged that we were taking a risk. Despite the danger, or maybe because of it, I leaned in and pressed my lips to hers. She responded instantly, wrapping her arms around me. The fear, the excitement, the uncertainty had all disappeared in that moment, leaving just the two of us. From that day on, there was a shift in our dynamic. It was as if recognizing the risk made everything even more intense. Every touch, every glance was charged with new energy. We were playing with fire, and we both realized it. But neither of us wanted to stop. The thrill, the danger of being caught, I'd never experienced anything like it. One night, when I was about to leave, she stopped me. "Alex," she said in a serious voice, "I just want you to know that no matter what happens, I don't regret anything." Her words caught me off guard. I looked up at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just a game to her, it was real. And to be honest with myself, it was real to me too. I reached out and took her hand in mine. "I don't regret it either," I said. And in that moment, I realized that no matter what happened, I would be coming back. Our friendship, the way she made me feel it, was worth the risk. It was worth everything,